So welcome back. Now, the smallpox is a viral infection that is well known even to the ancients. In around 1500 BC, the ancient Egyptians described it as something that would come as an outbreak through various towns and villages, and it was worldwide. It was in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, and even as recent as the 1960s, there were over 10 million cases worldwide. Now, the smallpox infection would first show up as a very high fever in a patient, and this would be followed shortly by headache and vomiting. And then within 2 weeks, they would get this horrible rash. And this rash was like little blisters filled with pus. They were very hard, like beads in the skin. And then they would slowly drain. And then as they drained, they would scab over, and the scabs would fall off. And as they fell off, the patient would be left with these permanent scarring called pockmarks. There were two types of the smallpox virus, and hence there were two known infections from it. There was a smallpox major, and this was the one that was the most common, and it was actually the most deadly. So for every 100 people that got this type, 30 would die, and the 60 that would survive would have a lot of medical problems going forward and a lot of scarring, and some had even blindness. The smallpox minor was not as deadly. For every 100 people that got that, only one or two people died, and they tended to get still the scarring, but less so. It just was a different strain of the same viral infection. And so, as early as 1500 AD, by the Chinese doctors, maybe even earlier by them, they would take the scab from a smallpox minor patient or someone who had recovered from the smallpox minor disease, and they would grind it up and they would blow it up the nose through a patient who had not been exposed to smallpox ever. And this process is called variolation. And what would happen is now these patients, when the smallpox outbreak would come through, they wouldn't get the infection. And sure, they did have a chance of 1 to 2% of dying from the actual process itself, but it was much better chances than 30% dying. And this process starts to spread, and it becomes common in Asia, in Africa, and Europe. And it was really the only way to survive a smallpox outbreak if it came into town. Now, however, by the late 1700s, the common folk noticed that those who got infected with cowpox, which is a cousin of the smallpox, and was involved with people who handled cows or dairy farmers or milkmaids, etc., they would get the cowpox virus. They would get a few similar sores on their hands and their face, but it would be a very mild infection, and then they would not get the deadly smallpox. And in fact, these are the people that would help those with smallpox during an outbreak recover and get better. So in 1774, there is an English farmer by the name of Benjamin Justy. And Justy has a lot of children and a wife, and the smallpox outbreak is coming through England at the time. And what he knows is that those who have cowpox don't get this disease. He himself has had cowpox, a couple of his workers have had it. So he takes his wife and his two oldest sons down to the farm, to the barn in the farm. And what he does is he takes a scab from a cow that has cowpox, and he takes the pus and he scratches it into the arms of his wife and his two sons. Now, the boys do great. They have no symptoms. However, the wife has fevers, chills, and some complications, but she's fine as well. Now, when Farmer Benjamin does this, he does get harassed by his neighbors. They start calling him names like inhuman. They even predict that his sons will turn into beasts with horns, etc. However, a few years later, when the smallpox comes through town, his sons don't even get it. And you have to realize that this is all happening 20 years before Dr. Edward Jenner starts publishing his work on vaccine experiments. Now, Farmer Benjamin goes back to his farm. He lives a nice, quiet life. He lives until the age of 79. He has 7 kids, and he really doesn't get much recognition for this. However, on his tombstone, it is written that he is the first to introduce cowpox by inoculation in 1774. And this story just goes to show you that sometimes the brave action of an ordinary human, and in this case, just a father trying to protect his sons or his family, can make a huge difference for mankind. As Galadriel said, Even the smallest person can change the course of history. Until next time.